Good morning, everyone. Welcome this morning. My name is Francesca Warren. I am the owner and founder of the Educators Room, and thank you for being here today. Whether you're a parent, an educator, an administrator, an advocate, or simply someone who cares about special education in this country, you're in the right place. We're at a pivotal time, guys. I was just telling our panelists, we were sitting in our readers' room and we were trying to figure out what do we do with all of this news that's happening around special education. Should we wait to have something? And we just all felt like right now is the time for us to have some conversations for parents, and for teachers and for just the community. This is a pivotal time. And over the last few months, we've seen major structural shifts proposed at the federal level, from people advocating for the Department of Education to be completely gone, to English language learners losing grants to help them get acclimated to school. The Department of Education is now in the process of transferring core special education functions to the Department of Health and Human Services, and civil rights enforcement to the Department of Justice. At this time, a DOJ memo has also raised serious questions about whether the protections enacted by Olmstead versus LC nearly 3 decades ago will continue to be upheld. These aren't some type of abstract policy debates. We're not doing this for fun. These are real immediate implications on how children with disabilities are identified, served, and protected. So whether the rights of families, and this is for the rights of families that have really fought since Brown versus Board of Education, who laid the groundwork for disability rights in education, that they remain secure. So today we've brought together a panel of experts to help us cut through the noise and answer questions that you actually need. We're going to take a second and let's start with introductions. Lisa, do you want to start?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm Lisa Leitner. I am a former teacher and current special education advocate and lobbyist. Um, I wear a lot of different hats, but you can find me at adayinourshoes.com. And I just want to say, as we talk today, I've been an advocate since 2010, and there seems to be this kind of like zero sum, all or nothing thinking. And it'll be no surprise that I'm disagreeing with, and I'm not happy with a lot of things that are going on. But that doesn't by any means indicate that I think that the system as it was is perfect. The system needs a lot of changes. But I just don't agree with how it's being changed. If my roof is leaking, I don't blow up my house. I fix the leak. So I get a lot of that as well. My kid wasn't being served, and all these different things. And I hear that. I mean, I've spent 16 years helping parents get their IEPs, solid. So anyway, I just wanted to add that.
Absolutely. Robin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. And Francesca, thank you so much for having me. I'm Robin Linscott. I'm the Director of Education and Family Policy at the ARC of the United States. The ARC is the nation's largest advocacy organization for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We have nearly 600 chapters across the country. I also was a special education teacher for 8 years in New York City. I'm the daughter of a lifelong special educator. I'm also the sibling to a young man, Neil, who has autism and multiple disabilities. So have really seen this work from a whole lot of vantage points, now kind of leading the ARC's national advocacy work with Congress and the administration.
Thank you. Dr. Kenyon Andrews, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, thank you for having me. And so I come to this conversation wearing a few hats, and I think that it is important for people to know. I'm currently an exceptional needs specialist here in the West Coast, but I'm also an advocate as well. And I have taught and I've supported students on the South, East, and the West Coast, whether those are in charter schools, Title I districts, and everything in between. I also serve in several different capacities with the Council of Exceptional Children. And much of my research focuses on students who sit at the intersection of disability and race, particularly Black youth who are already navigating systems that are not designed with them in mind. So when we talk about these federal changes and what they mean for students with disabilities, I'm also thinking about those children who have already been overlooked twice, and that's my lens.
Thank you so much for that. Nicole?
Hi, my name is Nicole Green. I'm a very proud National Board Certified Special Educator. I actually just finished up my 13th year in the classroom 1 hour ago. So happy summer. I'm kicking it off with you amazing folks. I am a proud member of the neurodivergent community myself. And I am also a board member for New York State CEC, the co-chair for the Diversity Committee for the National CEC, and an ambassador for Teachers Unified to End Gun Violence. So my lens is multifold, and I am here today to talk about what's going on in education.
Absolutely. And Dr. Andrews and Nicole are very modest. They're one of our top 50 educators. And so, guys, when we pulled out the call, we were like, we need some people boots on the ground in special education. They called, they answered it. So thank you guys for being here. Now, we talked a little bit about this. This has been a heavy week, from the Office of Special Education moving to Health and Human Services, who would be overseen by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and also the Office of Civil Rights Complaints, who would be overseen by Todd Blanche, which is, we know, is not permanently in the role, but is just holding place right there. We have these two things that are happening. And then on top of that, there was a memo from the Department of Justice that claimed federal courts have misinterpreted the rights of people with disabilities to live and receive services in their community. This goes against the ruling from Olmstead versus LC from 27 years ago. And really, advocates are arguing this is unnecessary isolation and segregation of people with disabilities. And it's discrimination under ADA. From you guys' lens, can you talk to us about what was your initial reaction when you heard this, your communities, and which are you tracking more than one than the other, or are all two things just kind of like blowing up at the moment? And we can start with Robin, from your lens. What do you think?
Sure. I think my initial reaction was that we were not surprised. I think the timing took a lot of us kind of in the DC special education policy community by surprise, because there had been so many moments in the last year where it was like rumored it was happening, right? And everybody like ran to their man your posts, and then it didn't happen, right? And so all of a sudden it kind of came out of nowhere. But none of us were surprised. Unfortunately, I think we have known that their goal was to move this office out of the Department of Education, both offices, OSERS and OCR, from the get-go. One thing I think we were really surprised by is that for the last 8-9 months, we'd been having pretty productive conversations with the assistant secretary at OSERS, with the secretary herself, about the disability community's concerns, specifically about moving this office to HHS. And a lot of the conversations centering around whether the Department of Labor or HHS would be a better home for this, and kind of us giving, the disability community giving our perspective, and then feeling like we were told that was being heard. We were told that we hear you, we hear parents, we understand your concern with HHS. And then all of that seemed to be disregarded in this statement, while also saying that we listen to parents and we're doing what parents and folks asked us to do. So not surprised at all, but still shocked that it actually happened.
I think I was... So initially, yes, it wasn't a surprise because, because it was like, okay, the other shoe dropped. I think that, so in Pennsylvania, we also had a big something kind of blow up on Monday. So then it was that. And then on Wednesday was the OSEP OSERS thing. And then on Friday, of course, was the Olmstead thing. So it was a very heavy week here in Pennsylvania. I think it hit me first as a parent, just because my son is very high needs, and had he been born a generation or two ago, I absolutely would have been encouraged to institutionalize him. And for all the worries I've had over the past 19 years, like, institutionalization was never one of them, right? But I think also, and I told my audience this, is that we have to remember that, first of all, the speed and the frequency and the cadence at which all of this is happening is on purpose. It's designed to overwhelm people. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that this isn't decided, right? Like it all has to, we know that, maybe the courts have already, court cases have already been filed or lawsuits have already been filed, but everything that's been going on, this administration has lost about 70% of the court cases. They make these changes, somebody sues, and 70% of the time they're losing. So it's not over. And I don't think it didn't tell us anything that we didn't already know, right? Like I already knew how this administration felt about and prioritized disabled people of all ages and colors. This was one more confirmation of that.
I would say also in that same, what was your initial reaction with just across the country? There were so many things that were happening simultaneously, like one day after the other. And so it was just this overwhelming whiplash effect of like, okay, this happened. So this is what I need to do, and this is how I need to prepare to strategize and who I need to reach out to. But then there was another thing that happened. And so it comes in such a very overwhelming way that it also makes it very difficult to strategically plan within a short amount of time, just due to all of the um, situations that we've been bombarded with. But here's what I keep coming back to. The Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, it has existed within the Department of Education for a reason. Education is that context. And so when you pull or you plan on pulling that office out of an education department and drop it into a health department, you fundamentally change that frame. And so now special education starts to look more like a medical service than an educational right. And that is what matters, because the moment we start treating a disability as a health condition to be managed instead of a learner identified to be educated, we've already lost what is profound. And so I want to be honest about what I don't know. I don't know what HHS's infrastructure looks like when it comes to managing IDEA compliance at scale. What I do know is that this isn't a lateral move, it's a philosophical one. And so the families that are going to be sitting in IEP meetings this upcoming school year aren't going to feel that bureaucratic shift right away. They're going to feel it when their complaint goes somewhere new, when the response time takes twice or three times as long, and then when nobody at the receiving agency has ever read an IEP.
Yeah. And I mean, just thinking about, the Department of Education now has 14 interagency agreements with 6 other agencies. Like, not only is it the speed at which things happen, kind of where it's like everything's happening at once and then it's quiet and then a heavy week. But just thinking about like that is so intentional. The goal is to really spread it out so we really can't see what's happening, what's shifting. It's distraction, it's smoke and mirrors, right? It requires a lot more work to know who's handling what in terms of our programs. I think, my initial thought really was just like, I feel like it was like, pictures of all of the things that RFK has said about students with disabilities, about mental health, about SSRIs, about medication, all of the, accusations and lawsuits of inaccurate information, fake citations, reporting that his agency is responsible for. Just, that was playing through my head as I'm thinking, this is the person who is going to lead the agency that supports my students. Like that, it's a 5-alarm fire, truly, as far as I'm concerned, especially considering Todd Blanche and RFK Jr. have no training in education, no experience in education. Todd Blanche's background is in criminal litigation and white-collar criminal defense. Like, this is not somebody who has any knowledge of supporting civil rights. So yeah, like it's a 5-alarm fire by all means.
I think it's also important to point out that this allows, when you spread it out like this, before this we had one place to go. And now it's like that agency can say, well, I thought they were doing it. Well, I thought they were doing it. Well, I thought they were responsible for that. And so like it really allows for really no accountability, because you can always say, I thought the other agency was doing it.
Yeah.
And that's what concerns me a lot.
Yeah, and go ahead. Sorry.
To kind of jump off of what Kenyon was saying, of like, it's not only this, you know, kind of like this shift to this medical model, right? And kind of like bringing us back to the idea of students with disabilities can only be educated in like an institutional or healthcare setting. It also separates OSERS, Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, from OESC, the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, which in a previous interagency agreement has been moved to the Department of Labor. So not only are you saying that a disability is a medical and a health concern, you're also saying that students with disabilities are not just general education students first.
Yeah.
What else are we saying to our young children with disabilities, where if the rationale for moving K-12, you know, the office overseeing K-12 Gen Ed to labor is because the goal of our education system is to create opportunities for you to join the workforce? Well, is that not the same goal for students with disabilities, right? So I think it's not, it's this medicalized model, but it is also the separating out, right? All of our education laws were written to align with each other, right? It's like a woven fabric. And so when you start pulling apart these pieces, right, there are pieces of ESSA, the K-12 law, that impact greatly students with disabilities, right? How do you have those things into completely different agencies? It's just mind-boggling.
Yeah, that's something I worry. Go ahead, Kenyon.
One of the things I just wanted to add really quick is with having multiple agencies, we also have to think about those students who are our English language learners or our gifted and talented students who also have disabilities. And so we're going to, because they're not going to be in the same department, they're not going to be in the same location, we're going to be treating them from health and from HSS based on their disability, but then also if we look at that they need to be institutionalized, how are we providing them with advanced courses for their studies, or how are we making sure that they are able to properly acquire the English language? And so it is in that same regard of like, this isn't something that's theoretical. We have students who identify as multifaceted in that manner, but also how are they going to be seen as an education student first?
Yeah. I really, as somebody who just spent the last 3 years starting in ICT, or like integrated co-teaching for the non-lingos, in my school, and growing it for the last 3 years, the biggest battle was belonging for students with disabilities. Above and beyond, the biggest battle was getting the teachers to get on board, seeing them as, you know, students who are of, you know, cut from the same cloth, who can do the same things, who can experience the same successes. And there's a huge divide in schools between general education and special education teachers, even in, and maybe even especially in schools where there is co-teaching and there is integration, right? So like, to separate them is not just, you know, from different agencies, is not, it feels at least like a really intentional shift in how we think about students who are neurotypical and who are not.
I think,
not for nothing, the information coming out of HHS is just false. Like, it's just like, it's made up, it's false, it's like there's no substance or science behind it. And that's, you know, at the core, as far as what we've heard so far about autism, and I know that is one of the big chunks of anybody's special ed caseload, but what we're hearing about autism, it's just false. Like,
this is, and I'm so happy to have you guys on, because you guys were just like killing it with the conversation. So that is one of the things I wanted to talk about, moving it under two departments that have been, you have one department, the Department of Justice, that has literally been the henchman to this administration and going after people politically, right? So they have even said they have stopped prosecuting cases, civil rights cases, like they're not even doing anything with them. Then on the other side, I'm in Atlanta, where the CDC is based, and I can tell you right now, where friends of mine who worked in the CDC are saying what they're telling you is not true. What they're putting out is absolutely not true. And so to have those two departments now overseeing some of our most vulnerable students makes me nervous, because what are you going to say about students with autism? What are you going to say about students that have this? And so, Dr. Andrews, when you talked about framing this as now it's going to be looked at as a medical condition, if you look at the language from Robert Kennedy, he has talked about, vitamin K doesn't need to be given to newborns. Things that just are not true. And so I wonder, what is the end goal? And maybe it's chaos, but maybe it's more sinister in that this is another way for private industries to come and claim to help our children without evidence-based practices. And that to me is even scarier than just the hate of it, than just the chaos of it. Is this a move? Because we've seen stories where these private industries are setting up clinics to help our kids, and there is no evidence that some of this stuff is working. So have you guys thought about that, or am I just too far on the left field? And I can be.
No. I think that there are so many things, right, that are unknown. And what scares me, I think, is it feels like there are some really obvious reasons they're doing the things that they're doing, but it also feels like we don't, there's a lot happening under the table, around the table, behind our backs, which is, very unnerving. But I worry that we won't even know, a lot of times I think the pushback that I get when we do things like this is like, it's speculation, we don't know. But the truth is, I've taught for 13 years, and special education is completely different in so many ways to how it was when I first started teaching. And that's because of, the investment in research. And if we are cutting grants, and we are moving education into a place where, evidence-based practices are no longer important, and we'll just make up the research and put fake citations and say this is what we do for kids with autism now, or for kids with ADHD, or any, we really risk damage that we can't even predict for years and years to come. Because the research now was done, a couple of years ago that now supports what we do. And that's, without that research, without these people in the field being supported, being funded, it's going to take decades to even understand what these lasting impacts are going to be, let alone fix them.
And my fear in pushing back on that is that he is also, like, the disability community and the autism community specifically has always been divided. Mm-hmm. But I mean, my Facebook page is very large. It has over 200,000 on it. And the division between the MAHA autism families and those, there's a whole segment of this community that is on board with this. And for whatever reason, they finally feel heard. And I, I've dedicated the past 20 years to helping kids get their needs met on their IEP. And so I get this pushback of, well, my kid's IEP was junk and he was regressing and this and that. And I hear that. And that's what I do all day, every day. We know that the system needs to be fixed, but this isn't fixing it. This is not fixing this is, hey, you heard it here first. It's going to get much, much worse if this continues, because now you have nowhere to go. Like, I'm hearing from advocates and parents alike who have filed OCR complaints 1 or 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. They're just sitting in an inbox somewhere. They're not. And then what else do you do if you don't have the money to file for due process? What other options do you have?
I have to ask this, and I think that these points, because on the Educators Room, we have about 150,000, and there is a clear divide where people think that this is going to help solve whatever their issue is in education. So I have to ask, Robin, at the ARC, the administration has said we're sending more money to special education. They're going to send more money. Have you guys seen any transparency around that, and where is it going? Because we know that more and more students with disabilities are coming into our schools. Teachers need trainings, school districts need training. We need, like, it, everybody needs to be trained, resources. What are you guys seeing in Washington?
Yeah.
Is it supporting that, or is this just hearsay?
That's a really great question. And I think we can kind of talk about it in a few different buckets. So there was a big announcement, I don't know, maybe a month, 6 weeks ago. What is time? That there was this a new investment of $144 million into special education. That was not new money that the administration decided, to find to invest in special education. Those were actually unspent ARPA funds from COVID that states had sent back that they weren't able to appropriate in time, that they weren't able to spend in time. So this was leftover money from ARPA, from the COVID Recovery Act. So this was not new money. There was the tiniest increase in funds for IDEA Part B, which is the grants to states, right? K-12. But I think it was $50 million increase. I actually, off the top of my head, don't remember, but it doesn't even keep up, A, with inflation, or B, with the increase in the rate of students identified. So when they use these phrases like historic increases, I don't think the evidence is actually supporting that. Mm-hmm. I think the other piece of the funding that I'm really concerned about is the last two presidents' proposed budgets included. They proposed block granting two chunks of money. So there's a chunk of money called IDEA Part B, Section 619. And this is a pot of funds that go specifically to preschool programs to support students with disabilities age 3 to 5. So kind of this in between, like you're out of early intervention in Part C, you're in Part B, but it's really money focused on preschool. And then the other part, and I think really important to the conversation here, is what we call Part D. These are national activities, different things that support kind of our special education system as a whole. One of the biggest pieces is called personnel prep. These are grants that go often to universities that help to train future and current educators in supporting students with disabilities. So what the president's budget proposed was basically just lumping those all together. They said, you know what? We're going to try and make things easier. We are going to put everything into this one giant bucket, and states can choose how they spend this money. And I think we've seen this movie before, where often when there is some choice left, that maybe all of those programs are not funded in the same way. So my concern in kind of looking at this funding, my first concern is really in those Part D funds and those Part B 19 preschool funds, because those are things that the president has tried to block grant in the past. Congress has rejected those the last two appropriation cycles. They said, no, thank you. We want to lay out each individual line item for IDEA. But that's really where my concern is.
I think just piggybacking really quick on what was just said, we also have to look at not even currently, but previously, ever since special education has been in place, it has never been ever been fully funded. Congress has vowed to provide 40%, but we've never seen anything close. We've seen between 10 to 17% of that special education funding. And so that's over several administrations, over many decades. So special education has never been fully funded. And now we're wanting to make changes, and we're saying that, oh, well, here's some money here. Here's historical, funding that's being provided, but it's never been fully provided. And I think that is a conversation that people don't understand is we've never seen 100% fund. We've never seen 50% fund at all when it comes to special education. And so everything that we're looking at doing, we aren't doing this from a place of, oh, well, they've already there's been a history of them receiving 100% funding. That hasn't even been the case. And so we have to go back to how can we make sure that we are not only providing for these students who have special education needs, but that we are fully funding it across all 50 states.
Yeah.
You're right. And I think another piece that gets missed is that they throw around these big numbers of 50 million of this or whatever. You know, Pennsylvania alone has 500 school districts. Like when you do the math and whittle it down, I mean, you're talking about peanuts. I mean, it's just not anything relevant, but 50 million sounds like a lot, you know, and it's just not.
But it's really pocket change in like our entire federal budget, you know?
Right.
Yeah. And I'm Dr. Andrews, I'm glad you brought that point up, is that IDA has never fully been funded. And I want to talk a little bit about, because there is a misnomer around people thinking that this fight is just for students with disabilities. This fight started with Brown versus Board of Education, because the argument that they use, that the lawyers use to argue that, is the argument on the basis on how we have IDEA today. Now, you guys are special education experts, but does anybody want to talk about that? Because I think that is a critical piece, because what one does to one, we do it to all, right? Right now, we're talking about students with disabilities, but these could be English language learners. These could be our girls, Title IX. All of these things are really, once Brown versus Board of Education, it set the legal casework to say, hey, our kids in special education deserve it also.
Yes, and so I definitely think when we're talking about Brown v. Board of Education, it didn't just say that Black children deserve to sit next to white children. It said that separate inherently produces inequality. And so disability rights advocates have utilized this exact same logic to opening schoolhouse doors for children with disabilities. And so if we allow this administration to successfully reframe community integration as optional rather than obligatory, we are functionally reversing course on both of those legacies at the same time.
Yeah.
And we haven't even broached the topic of disproportionality and intersectionality and the massive overrepresentation of Black and Brown bodies in special education. We also haven't broached the school vouchers and how are all of these going to together further segregate our schools and segregate our students from, getting the appropriate education that they need. I feel very concerned that, should this continue, that, Francesca, you mentioned it, like what they do to one is a trial for what they will do to all. I worry that it's, it starts with our students with disabilities, and then it continues to trickle down.
We have a couple of comments. We have
I
Cindy.
just also want to add, and I appreciate you for sharing the overrepresentation and intersectionality and all of those things. For me personally, I also have to remember that when we're talking about moving to HHS and the medical model, Black bodies historically have been treated and they have been deemed from a medical model,
Yeah.
dating back to slavery, dating back to their strength and how they are cognitively incapable of doing X, Y, and things just because of their race.
Yeah.
And so now factor into what we're currently seeing. We're currently seeing special education being moved to a health medical model, but also with the overrepresentation, that is only going to create a greater gap and a greater inequality for those Black and Brown students.
Yeah. Thank you for adding that. That is, I think is really
And
important.
I think it's important to add that and this isn't a conspiracy theory. This is something that's been openly admitted and studied and documented and researched and published, that there was a policy center out of Colorado that published a study, I want to say like 15 years ago, and it documented this decades-long effort to get American families to hate your public schools.
Yes.
to make you unhappy in your public schools,
Mhm.
to make it an unpleasant experience, to pit parents against teachers, parents against schools, with the end result to make the case for privatization,
Yes.
to fund public money into private interests and into these private schools. And if we look at what happened when we privatized prisons, it's really the parallel there. And this is exactly what they're trying to do, is funnel this public money. I mean, this is, and again, this is well documented, well published, and it's been, it was started in the 70s or 80s. And I think that when you do something like that for 3 or 4 or 5 decades, we're at that break point. It's certainly been accelerated, and I think some kerosene or some gasoline has been thrown on it in the past 2 years. But that's the end result, is to, because the other thing we know about vouchers is that for voucher dollars, only 10% of voucher dollars on average creates new private school enrollments. The other 90% of families were going to private school anyway. They're just now getting their money back. So it's really just a relief or a bonus for families who could already afford private school and were already making that choice. And then the other thing we know about private schools is that they don't have to serve disabled kids. They're not bound to IDEA. They're not required to provide special ed. They're not required to provide IEPs. So there you go.
And to add to that, even special education schools, right? Like private schools that are specifically for kids with disabilities do not follow IEPs. They do not have to hire special education teachers. And so, you're sending your kids to these schools in good faith that they are special education specialists, and they don't even have a degree in special education. Like, it is very, very unnerving. So even if best case it provided the opportunity, or best case the opportunity for kids to attend these schools, the teachers don't necessarily have the training and skill set to make academic gains. We spend these times making these really thoughtful IEPs for our students who are out of district, writing goals that are ideally meaningful and appropriate, and then the school does no tracking of them, right? They do what they want.
And they sign away FAPE to take a lot of these special ed or special needs vouchers to go to these autism schools. You sign away FAPE. So if it doesn't work out 2, 3, 5 years down the road, you have zero recourse. You have just wasted 5 years of your child's education. You can't go back and collect comp ed.
Yep.
And time is right. Like for many students with disabilities, they are already behind in school, right? And then you take away even 1 year. Every day matters for kids with disabilities. Every single day matters. And if you take away a year, 2 years, 3 years of their school, it's consequential.
Yeah. So we have
I think also in that same conversation, we have to look at what these changes could implicate 10, 15 years from now. And we are looking at potentially a historic legal concern in the sense of their rights being violated by not having the right services, by the schools and the districts and the counties violating those services. And this is something historic that we can see that plays out in our courtrooms, that it ends up costing billions and billions of dollars just to get to where we currently are, not to advance it, but just to be back where we currently are. And so that's also something that we have to consider, whether you have a stake in the game or not. We're all taxpayers. This is going to have a huge effect. Thinking about those things, if there's not an about face done that's done soon enough.
Yeah. We have a parent right here. This is Cindy Dutch. She says Part D, this is to your point, Robin, that Part D also includes parent training and information.
PTIs, absolutely.
Yeah, we would not be able to serve families in anywhere near the level that they are now. So
absolutely, and I think that's such an important point. And I only really wanted to highlight the personnel prep because we were talking to this group of teachers, but I think the PTIs, the parent training and information centers, every state is required to have at least one. Many states have multiple, and they're often a family's kind of first go to, right? Can be their first call when they're really struggling with something happening in their school. And I think now when we're thinking about the fragmentation of the Department of Ed, the PTIs become that much more important. And we want to make sure that they have as robust funding as possible. And, I think there is potentially, right, if left up to the states to determine what part of their Part B funds will, if they smush all these funds together, giant pot, and it's up to the states, sometimes there could be a disincentive almost for a state to fund a PTI, right? Because if a PTI is seen as giving parents this information and the knowledge and recognizing and telling parents these are your rights, that could potentially lead to due process and litigation, the state might have a disincentive, right, to give parents that information. And so that is also really scary.
So another parent they want to talk about, and this has been a common complaint that I've seen with students with parents with students with disabilities. Not only has SPED never been fully funded, the essential support for staff with different needs like paraprofessionals, interpreters for our deaf and hard of hearing students have never been adequately compensated, thus leading to chronic vacancies. The chronic vacancies, we know, then kids aren't getting the services they need. Our SPED teachers do not even have the support they need to serve our students. So putting them into these two separate departments, then you have this DOJ memo that says, they don't have the luxury of being in their own community. I don't know. And this is going to kind of get to our second question about once SPED and once IDA falls to our states, are they prepared? Are states prepared to handle it? And what are the funding mechanisms that are the most vulnerable that we see are going to have something happen to them?
So I participate in a lot of different groups and boards and all that. And I was on a call last year, 2025 at some point, and the Pennsylvania Secretary for the Bureau of Special Ed was on the call. And this was when, I think it was like one of the very first announcements where they just said they were going to dismantle the Department of Ed. Now, Pennsylvania history, we actually had IEPs in 1971 and 72, so a few years before IDEA. We were told from our own Bureau of Special Ed that in Pennsylvania, it's business as usual. Do not expect any changes. That we have a history that existed before IDEA and not to expect any changes. I think that's a nice thing to say. But if you don't have the money, you don't have the money. And, our governor has tried to be very supportive, but he's just come right out and said, like, if we don't get this federal funding, we can't close the gap in Pennsylvania. If we don't get this federal funding for Medicaid, we can't close the gap in Pennsylvania. And, Pennsylvania participates in the expansion that pays our SLPs and our OTs and our PTs in the schools. So, and he's just come out and said, if we don't get that $10 billion from the feds, we can't make it up. But I do also worry, I deal with parents nationwide and in the states that aren't committed, and I don't want to necessarily name any of them, but some of the states, they're just like they try to call their hotlines and nobody ever answers and nobody ever returns their call and nobody ever, they try to file state complaints and it never goes anywhere and things like that. So not every state is as committed.
Well, even if they are committed, let's give them the benefit of the doubt that they are committed, right? And someone answers the call. If we're leaving it up to the states with no federal oversight, we're allowing the states to interpret IDEA as they see fit, right? We are not, kids with disabilities deserve the same equitable access to education regardless of what state they live in. And what we will see, I believe very, very much in my heart, is that kids who live in different states will have different access to IDEA, to FAPE. IEPs will be followed at different, funding irrelevant to the situation. If we leave it up to the states, we're leaving so many kids vulnerable to misinterpretation because there is no one to bring it above to say, no, this is what it was meant to be. We have a long history of states not meeting students' needs, right? Like Andrew versus like Douglas County, that was 2017. That wasn't even a long time ago. We're not looking at states have done right by kids historically, so now we can believe that they're going to like continue doing that. They haven't even really ever started. So that's the fear that I have.
I think also in that same conversation is that IDA compliance, as you've mentioned, is not uniformly strong enough anywhere.
Yeah.
So it's come down to one of the very dedicated special education coordinators and a whole lot of goodwill. But if we take away the federal oversight and even just loosen it, that goodwill starts to feel like an optional extra rather than a legal baseline. And so states are really positioned to absorb this. There are some states that have some very robust state level special education laws and enforcement mechanisms, but there are many that do not. And so even the ones that do, they're going to be scrambling to stand up against compliance, intake system monitoring, and due process infrastructure that the federal system has provided. And so the families will also feel this the hardest because when those districts are already cutting corners and those districts who are providing services disproportionately for low-income communities, rural areas, and communities of color, those families do not have the luxury of a private special education attorney on speed dial because they have federal compliant process because it has been the equalizer.
Yeah, I think two points I want to make is that even when you have a state that is known for having a really robust special education system like Pennsylvania, Lisa, it was only because of Park v. Pennsylvania, where parents sued the state of Pennsylvania to allow students with intellectual disabilities to even be educated in the schools. Yeah. So one of the reasons we have IDEA and we have a federal Department of Education is because when we know things have been left to the states before, right, returning it to the states, that hasn't really worked very well. And I think we can look at a really tangible example that happened a couple years ago in the state of Texas. So the state of Texas put an arbitrary cap on the number of students with disabilities that they were going to identify. Nationally, right, we see about 15% of students in public schools identifying as students with disabilities. And Texas, in an effort to save money, said we are going to cap this at 8.5%. So they were refusing to identify new students with disabilities. They were trying to remove students already identified from receiving services. And it was OSERS. It was OSEP that stepped in and said, hey, you can't do that. Child Find says that you are obligated to identify every single child with a disability. And all the rights of IDEA are there regardless of if the funding is there or not. So even if you're trying to save money, right, it doesn't matter. And so I think we have really tangible examples of even when we did have federal oversight, states trying to, circumvent that or find ways, to kind of undermine the rights of students with disabilities.
And I think that that's so important. And I have to ask, and maybe this is just me, is that the point? Because you can't think that taking it to the states, we are going to hear people, we're going to get results when there are proven cases where states have not done what they're supposed to do. I mean, if it wasn't for the federal government, our schools will still be segregated. And they are to an extent, but you would still have Black and white schools. You would still have Black students getting textbooks after the white students are finished with them. So in my mind, it makes me think, is that what we want to go back to, where states have the ability to opt into certain things? We have a question from a parent, and this is something, yesterday was National Call Your State Legislator, and they said, what can we do as parents and providers to help change the course of all of this? What can they do? Do they have to sit down and take this? What needs to happen?
Well, I know Kenyon and I are going down to DC in a few weeks to advocate. We will be at CELS. And I would say that, the best thing I think parents and educators can do is align with organizations, because organizations are able to help amplify your voice, right? I can't make, or I guess I could, but it would be a lot of work to make like appointments with our with our lawmakers. But because of the work that we do with CEC, we're going down to cells. So I would say that, like finding organizations where you can kind of collectively amplify that your voice is really, really important right now. Also because it's a support system, right? It's people who fear the same fears, who feel the same feels, who, I think community is more important than ever right now.
In addition, I would say on my end, when it comes to parents and families, the most important thing that you can do right now before this next school year starts is to treat their child's IEP as the legal document that it is. Not a plan, not a suggestion, not a good faith, a contract. Read every line, compared what's written to what's actually happening. And if you're supposed to receive 30 minutes of speech therapy twice a week, and that has been happening once a week or not at all, write that down today. Send an email to the school asking for clarification. The email creates a timestamp. It puts the question on record. You don't need a lawyer to do that. You just need to do it. Additionally, please find your state's parent training and information center before school starts. These are federally funded organizations. Every state has one, and they are specifically designed to help families like yours navigate the system. Free trainings, they help you prepare for IEP meetings, and they also know specific rules. Use them. That's what they're there for, and that is what is going to best support you in this fight.
I think it's also really important to mention that Congress has a really important role in trying to prevent or attempting to stop these actions, right? And unfortunately, we haven't seen a ton of action from Congress. We have midterms coming up in November, and I think it's really important that members feel pressure from their constituents that I'm not happy with this action. I want you to do something. I want you to say something, right? And it's really, really important if you live in a state or a district where your House member or your senator sits on the HELP committee in the Senate, the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, or your member sits on the Education and Workforce Committee in the House, to call your members, to email your members. I worked in the Senate. Every single call and email that you get from a constituent has to be logged. And most members get a weekly tally of, you had X number of constituents call about this issue, you had X number of constituents write in about this issue. And if they see that people are constantly calling and telling them that they are really unhappy about this, then they will need to do something. If I can make a shameless plug, you can also go to act.thearc.org. We have an action alert that you put in your address and it will automatically allow you to send an email directly to your member of Congress. It's super easy to help you advocate. And so, yeah, let's put pressure on these folks so that they know we're not happy with this.
I think at this point, it's almost like there's no reason not to, CEC, NCLD, like at the ARC, there's every organization at this point really has an action page where you just put in your information and, an automatic email or phone call goes. I am petrified of making phone calls, like I make my husband make every phone call for our family, and it's so easy to do. The congressional switchboard is so simple. It takes seconds to do. And like you said, every single call and write-in is logged. And I would say even, as low as like reaching out to your local government. Like I really think it has to be an all hands on deck. We need them to feel pressure at every level. Because it's an all hands on deck.
Yeah. And Lisa, I think you have something you wanted to say? We can't hear you now. Hold on one second. I'm gonna remove you. Hold on. Try now.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know what it feels like. It feels like you're talking to a wall sometimes, and I get it from where I live in Pennsylvania. Like when I'm contacting these folks, I get the same form letters, and they're not even trying anymore, and they're sending out this YouTube video response link to everybody who contacts them, and all that. But it does matter. They, like I said, they get, like she said, they get a log. The other thing is that the one thing that seems to motivate some of these folks is money. And, educate yourself on what companies are supporting what. And there's a lot of different boycotts going on right now, and they're very meaningful boycotts, and stores and businesses are feeling the pain. And spend your dollars with the companies who are supporting what you support. And it does take extra work, and it may take extra time to not use next day delivery and things like that. But it does matter. And because at the heart of it, like, I don't want my money going to this, first of all. That is, your citizen voice as far as your vote and your opinion, and then your financial voice, which is where do you spend your money? And that's everything from what bank you use to where you shop and what insurance company you're using if you have a choice, and all that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, go ahead, Francesca.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I'm thinking my brain is going a lot on what Kenyon said about like really how it looks for parents in the moment. And I'm just thinking about how much I, as a special educator, would appreciate if early on in the school year, a parent said, I'm really worried about this. Like, how do we collaborate to ensure that my child's IEP is being met? I think, so don't be afraid to reach out to your child's teacher and just say, this is something that I'm worried about, and like how, what they will ease your fears, or they will, or you'll know that you really need to put in like the extra work and the extra fight. I think it would go a long way to just, set that expectation for collaboration and communication early in the year. A great special educator is not going to fear that or misinterpret that as being combative. So I highly encourage all parents to really make sure you are as involved in your IEP, your child's IEP implementation.
And if your school has a PTA, see if they have there's a special ed PTA, or try to form one. I met an SLP a couple of weeks ago, and her caseload was 109 students.
Jesus.
So this is what they're dealing with. So it's not that they don't care about your child. It's that we have to think about teachers and related service providers, because they're, I met an ECE teacher who, was like, oh, well, when the SLP said I have 109, the ECE teacher was like, oh, really? I only have 29. So that means that's 29 IEPs she has to write and progress monitor every single year, in addition to teaching. Like, this is what teachers are dealing with right now. And we have to come together and admit that the system is broken, and that it's not, teachers are an easy target because they're so visible. But we have to come together and work together to solve this.
And it makes me think, and I appreciate that. And I think guys who are watching this, reach out to your this is their job, right? This is what they are there in Washington to do. Reach out to them, annoy them, go to their meetings, talk to them. And there's power in numbers. And somebody said this in the chat. They said the time now, what did she say? As a teacher, I can work to empower parents, but as a parent of a child with special needs myself, hey, Michelle, I'm learning that parent advocacy is even more powerful. There's no more us versus them mentally. Teachers, parents, paraprofessionals, therapists, and everyone with a vested interest in fighting for the rights of our kids with different needs need to unite to amplify our voices for sustainable change. So everybody, it doesn't matter. Now, we have 2 minutes before we get into some questions. What do you guys see as the greatest risk of harm to students with disabilities in the next 12 months? I'm gonna let you go first, Lisa, because I know you have to hop off.
I would just say, like, it just getting worse. Like so many students and I only hear the bad stories. Just once, I would love for a parent to call me and be like, I just wanted to call you and tell you my IP is great being implemented. I don't. I hear the horror stories. But there are so many kids whose needs are not being met and teachers are quitting in droves. Like, I just worry that the whole thing is just going to get worse. And it's so bad out there right now. Like, I can't even kind of visualize what worse looks like. I mean, I hate to be like, I don't want to be the Debbie Downer, but it's families are struggling, teachers are struggling. I think we just have to white knuckle it for the next couple of years and until this turns around.
Yeah, and I think that is a real sentiment, right? All of my friends who are special needs educators are feeling anxious, they're overwhelmed, they're struggling, and they're wondering if this is the role for them. What else do you guys think?
I would say that my biggest fear is what I would like to call the silent slide. And so it doesn't look dramatic from the outside. There aren't any big announcements, there aren't any obvious policy reversals, but it's the IUP meetings are getting shorter. The related services that gets moved to a group when it was supposed to be individual. The student who gets placed in a more restrictive setting because the general education teacher didn't get the support that they needed to make inclusion work. So none of that makes the news. None of this generates a federal complaint, but because most families don't know that they have the right to file one. And so that's the quiet harm that I'm watching for, because it's already happening in some places before any of these federal changes fully take effect. And so I want to state clearly that the students most at risk from this silent slide are our Black and Brown students with disabilities. They're the ones whose families are least resourced to push back, whose teachers have implicit biases because they've never been asked to examine, and whose communities have the least political capital in district budgeting conversations. And so we can't have a conversation about special education under threat without talking about whose special education was already the most fragile.
Yeah. Kenyon, I think that just ties in so closely with what I'm concerned about. And I think right now my most tangible thing is kind of more in the category of OCR, which we haven't had as much time to talk about because we could talk about all these things for hours. But I'm really concerned that with the move to DOJ, that families, especially Black and Brown families who are not speaking English as their first language, immigrant families, are going to feel really afraid to file complaints purely because of where this office is living, right? It feels a little bit less daunting to call the Department of Education and speak to, a special education expert than it does to call a law enforcement agency where, we don't know what types of privacy controls are being put onto students' data as they collect complaints the same way that they are at OCR, right? I'm really concerned that not only do we have this historic backlog, right, a 12-year low of OCR complaints being settled, but that we are going to have entire communities that feel completely disenfranchised from actually filing any complaints and getting any type of results or, resolution to the violation of their child's rights.
I think that is so important because I think that people don't realize, people think that the OCR complaints reports only are only filed for Black and Brown children.
The majority are filed on complaints of disability discrimination.
Yes. And so when we're talking about the interlinking of the two, where you won't do anything on a report of a Black kid being called racial slurs, you're also not going to do anything about a student with disabilities that's received none of their services, or is being ostracized, or is being put in a room all day and not being taught. It's going to be the same response. So I think that is critical for us. And somebody said this. Somebody said, indifference is the greatest harm. Indifference is the greatest harm. And when it's indifference, we go from there. Okay, we are over by 3 minutes. Very quickly, we know, and we really need to have a part 2. So I'm gonna call you guys back because I feel like this is not.
We've hardly scratched the surface.
Right, we've hardly scratched the surface.
Barely, yeah.
And I feel like we are every week there's something more. And I think the chaos is meant to wear people down so that people say, okay, I'm just going to let it go. Someone said this earlier about the number of court cases that are being filed. And I think what we're seeing, because there's a tracker and I'll put it on here, where, over 70% of the cases people are filed against this administration are being upheld. They are saying they broke the law. I have to know, as a parent who is thinking about, what do I do? I know I need to call my congressperson, but, Robin, for the ARC, is there a branch that they can go to? Like, are there organizations that can help them with this lift and they can put some of their anger behind to get some things done? What can happen?
Yeah, so we have nearly 600 local chapters across the board. The majority of the ARC's litigation at the federal level all of it comes out of our national office. The ARC is involved actually we are a co-plaintiff in the lawsuit Somerville Public Schools versus the Department of Education. And we anticipate that there will be more lawsuits filed, that maybe pieces of this might be folded into current lawsuits that are kind of ongoing and just working its way through the very slow judicial process. So definitely would encourage you to reach out to your local ARC chapter, specifically if you are having trouble with your child's IEP or you're concerned about filing an OCR report. Your local ARC chapter will be able to help you do that or point you to the right chapter that can help you in your state.
Perfect. I have to ask right now, and I get the part twos, guys. I want to reach out to them and see what dates work. We know, because I really want to talk about OCRs. I really want to dig into the OCR piece, because that to me is equally as concerning. What is the number one advice you would give a parent, a teacher, an advocate right now? It is June 26th. Many people have just gotten out of school. They understand what's happening, but they just haven't had a chance to really dig into it. What advice would you give them, guys?
I would say, I think because the information can be so overwhelming, and it's meant to do that, right? So you forget about what happened yesterday because you're thinking about what happens today, and then something new comes. I would say write things down. Like, if there's a concern that you have, keep a list and take the time to really research those things so you have an in-depth understanding of like what the possible downfall can be. I think it's so easy to just like, okay, well, that was last week's news, and it kind of, the news cycle fades things out. But when we have, like I said before, every single day matters for kids with disabilities, for the neurodivergent community. And so we really, I do think, need to be keeping tabs on the important issues and making sure that we're not losing sight of them, because that's what we need to be fighting for.
I would also say in that same conversation is for parents and for educators and practitioners, document, like was said, document what your concerns are, but also for those practitioners and those educators, document what you're doing for students, not as a part of your paperwork, but as a professional advocacy. And that is something that I do for myself. Is yes, it also aligns with compliance, but this is also when I sit down and I have conversations with families and with parents who are concerned about their children's services. I have my own information that I can put before them. This is what we did, this is what happened, so on and so forth. But aligning yourself not just as parent versus school district or teacher, but collaborating, coming together, and using our voices inside the buildings matter more than it ever has. And so, additionally, you want to get clear on what your state special education regulations are, not just IDEA, but what your state law may provide you, your child, your students, when it comes to more protections than you may realize. And so this knowledge allows you to become a stronger advocate in every IEP meeting and when you're also having those conversations with administrators.
Yeah. I think I would really urge educators, parents, and especially administrators to spend this summer, maybe take a little bit of time and like brush up on what does IDEA say, right? Maybe it's been many years since you last took a class that talked to you about what IDEA actually says and what rights that children and families actually have. And something that I'm begging any administrators that might be on here to do is to do that for your general education teachers also, because special educators cannot bear the weight of this change and this chaos alone, right? Everyone needs to know these are all our students, right? These are all an entire school district students. They need to know what these students are entitled to too. And it is not, we are at a moment in time where people can't say, oh, those are not my kids. It's not my problem. They're all of our kids. So to all teachers and to all administrators, just spend, find some from good resources, crack open your old ed, school textbook, and just brush up on what does the law actually say.
Yeah. I think that's so important too, because we can chip away at some of it, like at the pool, at the beach, when you like at your, barbecue, when having the cookout and someone brings up something about it, like just explaining what IDEA is, just explaining that before 1 in 5 kids with disabilities were not taught in their public schools. These little things. It's like, oh my God, a lot of people don't know that stuff. And when we give them the chance, like maybe we can chip away at some of that like narrative, like that Maha, this is the right way divide. Like I do believe that those small conversations matter too.
Now, go ahead.
I just wanted to just add one last thing. I just wanted to also say, like, having those conversations is also great, but also looking at what is happening in our country. And so, as of yesterday, there were 3 articles of impeachment that were put through in regards to the Secretary of Education, which is the first. This is the first time that this has happened, but that may seem like a huge Goliath situation, but all it takes is families, teachers, administrators writing, calling, as we mentioned, your local representatives and saying, hey, we're very concerned about this. I need you to make sure that you are supporting or co-signing these things, because that is a 10-15 second phone call. That's a 1 or 2 minute email to your representatives. But it's also something to where when you're collaborating and when you're doing this as a community, then your voices are amplified in those aspects.
I love that piece, because we didn't even get to that. And it's hard to impeach a member of cabinet, but it can be done. And because she is effectively circumventing Congress. It's Congress's role to dissolve the Department of Education. Now, this is kind of a aside, but I always ask all of our guests when they come onto webinars, and the last question is, tomorrow you wake up and you are the Secretary of Education. You have all the resources, all of the things. What are some of the first things that you are doing to advance whatever your mission is going to be?
I'm putting funding and laws into place, or proposing laws, obviously, that support general ed. Like, I think we need a rehaul of our pre-service education. I think that all general education teachers need significantly more training on special education. So yeah, I'm overhauling our pre-service teacher program.
I would say for myself, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a team, because let's be honest, this cannot be done by one person, but I'm also letting them know what my vision is. My vision is, hey, if I want to make sure that we are at least funding 50% of special education, these are the steps that we need to do to make that happen. But also in the same conversation that has been mentioned is sitting down with all of our universities across the country and saying, hey, it doesn't matter any student that is an education major, we need to make sure that we are providing them with the tools, the resources, and the classes so that way they can better understand special education. And then on top of that, I'm going to make sure I'm going to be pressing the gas pedal on ensuring that we are streamlining OCR, we're streamlining our due process or any of our complaints in a way that it doesn't take us 2, 3, 5 years just to be able to address these concerns. And so it would really be boots on the ground and creating that, and even working alongside local agencies and advocacy groups in that regard.
Yeah. Co-sign 100% the university. Let's focus on all teachers. Let's make sure, especially gen ed teachers, know and recognize from the get-go that all of us are special educators. All of these kids are our kids too. I would press Congress to fully fund IDEA. And this is a little bit of a pet project of mine, but I would also urge Congress to pass the Keeping All Students Safe Act, which would ban seclusion and significantly limit the use of restraint in schools, which we know are disproportionately used on students with disabilities, especially Black boys with disabilities. So those are kind of my two very concrete tangible pieces, while I also work to really make sure that especially students with intellectual disability, who are the most likely to be excluded from the general education classroom, have every opportunity to be included in the gen ed classroom. And that means starting by providing schools everything that they need to support the teachers so that they actually can provide those supports and services in the general education classroom.
Now, people have listened to you guys. We'll put Lisa's A Day in Her Shoes website on here. Where can people find you? Where can they reach out to you? A lot of the people on this live are advocates themselves. They're like, what's next? I'm ready to go. So where can they find you guys?
Oh, I will put my email into the chat. Everyone is welcome to email me. You can also find all of the arts resources, our action center, everything that we have up there at thearc.org.
I'm available on all social media platforms, from LinkedIn to Facebook to Threads to Twitter. You can find me at Dr. Kenyon Andrews. I am visible on all of those spaces, and please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions or any advocacy. I'm supporting it in all capacities.
I am everywhere, Mrs. G NBCT, email, social media. I'd love to connect. I'd love to grow, our community stronger together for sure.
Thank you guys for coming. And guys, just as a note for everybody who's watching, we have to keep this at the forefront. So whether it's you say, hey, the Educators Room, we want to write articles about all these things in special education, it's advocacy, it's calling, numbers, there's power in numbers. We hope you have a great Friday. We hope that after this, I'm going to give you one charge. Everybody who's watched us live today, call your congressperson. I am about to call mine. I am about to call Ossoff, Warnock, and I'm about to tell them I need you to put pressure on this administration. So guys, please do the same. We thank you for your time. You guys can rewatch this on YouTube, on our platforms, and have a great weekend.